I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted, but in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist, but they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning, but I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. How the hell does a washing machine get so dirty on the inside? The whole point is it's a sterile environment. Oh, god damn it. You're here every damn week. Don't you get like a job or something? Or go to college? Well, welcome to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week, we're going to read chapters 11 and 12, which is going to finish off the book Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Want to hear about the author? Sure, you seem like the type. Kenneth Grahame was born March 8, 1859, and died July 6, 1932. Kenneth Grahame was a British writer born in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he's known for the classic children's book, The Wind of the Willows, and also The Reluctant Dragon that no one's ever heard about, and that's about it. Fun facts? I was digging around for fun facts. I've already gone over him, his wife, his kid, his career. Turns out his wife suck. His kid was suffering, and they're just all horrible people. Hard to find a fun fact after that journey, so I wound up just looking up, what do people think about the book? And I found out that everyone thinks that there's 2 chapters that are considered weird and stylistically out of character with the rest of the book. They complain that they put a stop to the story and kind of seem shoehorned in. Wayfarer's All, the one I read last time that I hated so much, is universally considered long and boring and doesn't really add to the character development of Rat. Well, Piper at the Gates Dawn, which seemed more interesting, is weird because you have a lost kid in the story that never really comes back with any purpose. They don't bring that full circle to why you have to stop and go do that whole journey. And also, meeting the Piper didn't really come back either. It's not like he's been playing a hand in everything that's happening in this story. So it's kind of shoehorned in. Also, a lot of Christians think that's too pagan for kids. Also, it didn't do well with Edwardian sensibilities of the time. Apparently, these 2 chapters were inserted after the fact. The book was never intended to be for children. He was desperate to be taken seriously by his peers, so he tried to market it as a young adult novel or just something for people like him, big baby adults. But it was originally, the publisher said it was a whimsical satire upon life and an urbane exercise in irony at the expense of the English character and mankind. So, according to Elspeth, he had written all of these chapters were just kind of individual stories, so he had to kind of string them all together to kind of make a cohesive book. And while he did that, he didn't want all his peers thinking that he's just like a big wannabe child for the rest of his life, even though, as we learned earlier, his work area was basically like a playroom, which is freaking disturbing, like he's some sort of little. But he decided to shoehorn in a couple things to kind of make it seem a little more adult, a little more edgy, to make it seem more highbrow. But when the book finally got into the public domain, some people reissued it with Piper at the Gates Dawn removed entirely, which confused me because I thought it was a book about some secret world of little animals that act like humans, so if they have their own little god, who cares? But as we learned in the last couple chapters, it's clear these animals are like 6 feet tall and just walking around among humans, trading with them, bargaining and driving actual human-sized automobiles. So Pan, in that world, would be a god that also maybe saves human babies? I don't know. So maybe suddenly there's got Pan is competing with Christ? I have no idea. But apparently Christians hated it, and that's why it's not in some copies. There's a passage in one printing that says, rather than relating the ongoing adventures of Ratty, Mole, and Toad, Badger, and others, this chapter pauses the action as largely about the god Pan from Greek mythology. So that's their explanation why they took it out. Just that they didn't think it fit. I mean, there's other books that are awkward. Have you ever read On the Road? No one's ever yanking stuff out of that because editors just thought, this chapter's crap. But here, that's their excuse that they're trying to use, besides just saying, I don't like that he competes with Christ. So, they didn't apply this pausing the action to Wayfarers all. But whatever. Rosemary Hill, writing in The Guardian in June 2009, describes the chapter as, those of them who went on searching for the divine often found it enveloped in clouds of pantheism and neo-paganism, spiritualism and theosophy, the fates of the doubtful. It is this diffuse but potent supernaturalism that appears in The Wind in the Willows and one strange unsettling chapter, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. It is a section that abridgers of the book have always been quick to drop, though Grahame himself thought it essential, because he wanted to be taken seriously by his peers. Whether it is the latent homoeroticism, which was kind of surprising, I didn't see that when I read the chapter, of the vision, or simply the sudden change of tone that makes the scene so uncomfortable. As if it's that uncomfortable. It is certainly a failure, but while artistically it is the weakest part of the book, it is at the same time key to it. So that just explains, this person just doesn't like that it's not Jesus. If it was Jesus, they wouldn't care. They'd love the hell out of that chapter. So this is the excuse they try to come up with. So I went back and reread the chapter to find the homoeroticism, and all I could find was just that the Pan was muscular and had big, strong hands. So I guess that's the homoerotic part. You'd think that if you're going to write about a god, especially an old Greek god, you'd want to make them more like a superhero, but apparently that's too gay. It's amazing that people try to make up reasons in this chapter. It's so horrible and offensive, instead of, I don't know, just talk about the author if you're so concerned about what's so horrible and offensive. Talk about the author and his wife and how they raised their kid. But with that, and before I move on, I finally looked at my analytics, whatever, just wanted to see my stats. And one of them is like, what are people listening to your show on? And, none of this is interesting because I don't really have any listeners, but somebody is listening to me on their Apple Watch or something. It's a watch. They're listening to me. So whoever you are, if you're still listening, you haven't given up on me because I'm boring as hell, thanks for listening on your watch. I imagine you're jogging. Why would you want to hear my voice while you're jogging? Well, there you go. Oh, thank God for the grandfather clock to tell me to shut up and have us get down to the library so we can finish off the rest of this book. Well, there you go. You all settled. I'm sure you're enjoying yourself. Here in my home without invitation. Chapters 11 and 12, burp, real long. So either turn the podcast off now or buckle in for some long, pretentious stuff. This is his last chance to be taken seriously by his peers. Chapter 11, like summer tempests came his tears. Yeah, already it's pretentious as hell. This is a guy who's trying to impress other people. The rat put out a neat little brown paw, gripped Toad firmly by the scruff of the neck, and gave a great hoist and a pull. And the waterlogged Toad came up slowly but surely over the edge of the hole until at last he stood safe and sound in the hall, streaked with mud and weed to be sure, and with the water streaming off him, but happily and high-spirited as of old. Now he found himself once more in the house of a friend. The dodgings and evasions were over, and he could lay aside the disguise that was unworthy of his position and wanted such a lot of living up to. "Oh, Ratty," he cried, "I've been through such times since I saw you last. You can't think. Such trials, such sufferings, and all nobly borne. Then such escapes, such disguises, such subterfuges, all so cleverly planned and carried out. Been in prison, huh? Got out of it, of course. Been thrown into a canal, and swam ashore. Stole a horse and sold him for a large sum of money, Humbugged everybody, gave them all to do exactly what I wanted. I am, in all caps, a smart Toad, and no mistake. What do you think my last exploit was? Well, just hold on and I will tell you. Toad, said the water rat, gravely and firmly. You go off upstairs at once and take off that old cotton rag that looks as if it might have been formerly belonged to some washerwoman, and clean yourself thoroughly, and put on some of my clothes, and try to come down looking like a gentleman if you can. For a more shabby, bedraggled, and disreputable-looking object than you are, I have never set my eyes on in my whole life. Now, stop swaggering and arguing, and be off, and I'll have something to say to you later. Well, Toad was first inclined to stop and do some talking back at him, but he had had enough. That's two. He had had enough. That's bad writing. Of being ordered about when he was in prison. And here was the thing begun all over again, apparently by Rat, too. Oh, however, he caught sight of himself in the looking glass over the hat stand with the rusty black bonnet perched rakishly over one side. And he changed his mind and went very quickly and humbly upstairs to Rat's dressing room. There he had a thorough wash and brush up, and changed his clothes, and stood for a long time before the glass, contemplating himself with pride and pleasure, and thinking, what idiots all those people must have been to have ever mistaken him for one moment for a washerwoman, and by the time he came down again, luncheon was on the table. And very glad Toad was to see it, for he had been through some trying experiences that he had taken much hard exercise, since the excellent breakfast provided him by the G word again, the Roma. While they ate, Toad and Rat, he told him all of his adventures, dwelling chiefly on his own cleverness, and presence of mind in emergencies, and cunning in tight places, rather than making out that he had been having a gay and highly colored experience. But the more he talked and boasted, the more grave and silent Rat became. When at last Toad had talked himself into a standstill, there was a silence for a while. And then Rat said, there's a gnat. There's an actual gnat here in my basement. There's a gnat in front of my face in the basement. This place is falling apart. My home is falling apart. My washing machine stinks like ass, and I can't figure out why. And now I got gnats in my basement. Now, Toady, I don't want to give you pain. After all, you've been through already. But seriously, don't you see what an awful ass you've been making of yourself? On your own admission that you've been handcuffed, imprisoned, starved, chased, terrified out of your life, insulted, jeered at, and ignominiously, I can say stuff. I say stuff all the time. Flung into the water by a woman, too. Oh, apparently that's the biggest indignity of the entire journey. A woman pushed you? Where's the amusement in that? Where does the fun come in? And all because you must needs go and steal a motor car. And you know you've never had anything but trouble from motor cars from the moment you first set your eyes on one. See, this is the addiction thing again. But if you will be mixed up with them, as you generally are, 5 minutes after you've started, why steal them? Be a cripple if you think it's exciting. Be a bankrupt for a change, if you set your mind to it. But why choose to be a convict when you are going to be sensible and think of your friends and try to be a credit to them? Do you suppose it's any pleasure to me, for instance, to hear animals saying as I go about that I'm the chap that keeps company with gallbirds? Now, it was a very comforting point in Toad's character that he was thoroughly good-hearted animal and never minded being jawed by those that were his real friends. And even when most set upon a thing, he was always able to see the other side of the question. So, although while Rat was talking so seriously, he kept saying to himself mutinously, but it was fun though, awful fun, and making strange suppressed noises inside him. What? K-I-CK-CK-CK. How do I say that out loud? And then poop, poop, puh. All right, and other sounds resemble stifled snorts. And on the opening of soda water bottles, when the Rat had quite finished, he heaved a deep sigh and said very nicely and humbly, "Quite right, Ratty. Oh, how sound you always are. Yes, I've been a conceited old ass, and I can quite see that. But now I'm going to be a good Toad, and not do it anymore. Well, as for motor cars, I've not been so keen about them since my last ducking in the river of yours. The fact is, while I was hanging onto the edge of your hole and getting my breath, that doesn't come off right, in modern times, I had a sudden idea, a really brilliant idea, connected with motorboats. Oh, there, don't take on so, old chap. Instead, the upset thing is only an idea, and we won't talk any more about it now. And we'll have our coffee and, in all caps, smoke, and a quiet chat. And I'm going to stroll quietly down to Toad Hall and get my own clothes and set things going again on the old lines. And I've had enough adventures, and I shall lead a quiet, steady, respectable life, pottering about my property and improving it and do a little landscape and gardening at times, Yeah. And there'll always be a bit of dinner for my friends when they come to see me, and I shall keep a pony chase to jog about the country in, just as I used to in the good old days before I got restless and wanted to do things. Stroll quietly down to Toad Hall, cried the rat, greatly excited. What are you talking about? Do you mean to say you haven't heard? Well, heard what? Said the toad, turning rather pale. Go on, Ratty. Quick, don't spare me. What haven't I heard? Do you mean to tell me, shouted the rat, thumping with his little fist on the table, that you've heard nothing about the stoats and the weasels? What? The wildwooders? Cried the toad, trembling in every limb. Oh, no, not a word. What have they been doing? And now that they've taken Toad Hall, continued the rat. Toad leaned his elbows on the table and his chin on his paws. Toads don't have paws. And a large tear welled up in each of his eyes, overflowed and splashed on the table. Plop, plop. Go on, Ratty, he murmured presently. Oh, tell me all. The worst is over. I am an animal again. I can't bear it. When you got into that trouble of yours, said Rat slowly and impressively. I mean, when you disappeared from society for a time over that misunderstanding about a machine. Yeah, you know. Toad merely nodded. Well, it was a good deal talked about down here naturally, continued the rat, not only along the riverside, but even in the wild wood. Animals took sides, as always happens. The river bankers stuck up for you and said that you had been infamously treated. And there was no justice to be had in the land nowadays, but the wild wood animals said hard things. It served you right. It was about time this sort of thing was stopped. And they, and they got very cocky and went about saying that you were done for this time and that you would never come back again. Never, never. Toad nodded once more, keeping silence. Well, that was the sort of little beasts that they are. Are they little? I'm sure they're all like 10 feet tall, too. And the rat went on. The mole and badger, they stuck out through thick and thin. That you would come back again soon, somehow. They didn't know exactly how, but somehow. Toad began to sit up in his chair again and to smirk a little. Oh, they argued from history, continued the rat. They said that no criminal laws had ever been known to prevail against cheek and plausibility such as yours, combined with the power of a long purse. So they arranged to move their things into Toad Hall and to sleep there and keep it aired and to have it all ready for you when you turned up. And they didn't guess that what was going to happen, of course. Still, they had their suspicions of the wildwood animals. Now I come to the most painful and tragic part of my story. One dark night. Verp. It was a very dark night. And it blowing hard, too, and raining simply cats and dogs. A band of weasels, armed to the teeth, crept up silently in the carriage drive for the front entrance. Simultaneously, a body of desperate ferrets advancing through the kitchen garden possessed themselves in the backyard and offices, while a company of skirmishing stoats who stuck at nothing occupied the conservatory and the billiard room and held the French windows opening onto the lawn. The mole and badger were sitting by the fire in the smoking room, telling stories and suspecting nothing. How far was it a night for any animals to be out in? With those bloodthirsty villains broke down the doors and rushed in upon them on every side. And they made their best fight that they could. But what was the good? Oh, they were unarmed and taken by surprise. And what can two animals do against hundreds? Oh, they took a beat, them severely with sticks, those two poor faithful creatures, who turned them out into the cold and wet and very insulting and uncalled for remarks. Here, the unfeeling toad broke into a snigger, and then pulled himself together and tried to look particularly solemn. And the wild wooders had been living in there's that gnat again. Pfft. And the wild wooders had been living in Toad Hall ever since, continued the rat. and going on simply anyhow, lying in bed half the day and breakfast at all hours. Oh, God, breakfast at all hours. And the place in such a mess, in parentheses, I'm told, it's not fit to be seen. Eating your grub, drinking your drink, and making bad jokes about you, and singing vulgar songs about prisons and magistrates and policemen, horrid personal songs with no humor in them. Burp, and they're telling the tradespeople and everyone that they've come to stay for good. Have they? Said Toad, getting up and seizing a stick. I'll jolly soon see about that. Oh, it's no good, Toad, cried the rat after him. You better come back and sit down. You only get into trouble. But Toad was off. Oh, and there's no holding him. He marched rapidly down the road, his stick over his shoulder, fuming and muttering to himself in his anger, till he got near this front gate. He literally was just told there's hundreds of them. How can you fight him off? But here he goes. When suddenly there popped up from behind the palings a long yellow ferret with a gun. Who comes there? Said the ferret sharply. Stuff and nonsense, said Toad very angry. What do you mean by talking like that to me? Come out at once or I'll... And the ferret never said a word. But he brought his gun up to his shoulder. Toad prudently dropped flat on the ground, and bang! A bullet whistled over his head. The startled Toad scrambled to his feet and scampered off down the road as hard as he could. And he ran. He heard the ferret laughing, and other horrid little thin laughs taken up and carrying out without the sound. He went back, very crestfallen, and told the water rat. Again, since Toad is apparently at least 5 feet tall, and he lives amongst man, why doesn't he... Well, he can't call the police. And also, why aren't the police here already looking for Toad? You would think that this whole ferret in the house thing would be a minor inconvenience. Also, are these ferrets also 6 feet tall? Or are they just like little 1 foot tall ferrets? I have no idea. Nothing in this book makes sense. What did I tell you? Said the rat. It's no good. Oh, they got sentries posted, and they're all armed. You must wait. Still, Toad was not inclined to give in all at once, so he got out of the boat and set off rowing up the river, where the garden front of Toad Hall came to a waterside. Arriving within sight of his old home, he rested on his oars and surveyed the land cautiously. All seemed very peaceful and deserted and quiet. He could see the whole front of Toad Hall, glowing in the evening sunshine. The pigeons settling by twos and threes along the straight line of the roof, and the garden, a blaze of flowers. And the creek that led up to the boathouse, a little wooden bridge across it, all tranquil, uninhabited, and apparently waiting for his return. He'd try the boathouse first, he thought, and warily he paddled up to the mouth of the creek, and just as he was passing under the bridge when a crash, in all caps with an exclamation point, a great stone dropped from above, smashed through the bottom of the boat, and filled and sank. And Toad found himself struggling in the deep water. Why? Because he's a frog. He should be able to swim. Looking up, he saw 2 stoats leaning over the parapet of the bridge and watching him with glee. You'll be ahead next time, Toady, they called out to him. The indignant Toad swam to shore, and while the stoats laughed and laughed, supporting one another, and laughed again, till they nearly had 2 fits. That is, 1 fit each, of course. Toad retraced his weary way on foot and related his disappointing experiences to the water rat once more. Well, what did I tell you? Said the rat crossly. And now, look here. See what you've been and done? Lost me my boat that I was fond of. Yeah, it's Rat's whole identity. And simply ruined that nice suit of clothes that I lent you. Really, Toad, with all the trying animals. I wonder you managed to keep any friends at all. Well, the Toad saw at once how wrongly and foolishly he had acted. He admitted his errors and his wrong-headedness, and made a full apology to Rat for losing his boat and spoiling his clothes. And he wound up by saying, with that frank self-surrender which always disarmed his friend's criticism and won them back to his side, Ratty, I see that I've been a headstrong and willful Toad. Henceforth, believe me, I will be humble and submissive, and will take no action without your kind advice and full approval. Well, that's really so, said the good-natured Rat, already pleased. Then my advice to you is, considering the lateness of the hour, to sit down and have your supper, which will be on the table in a minute, and be very patient, for I am convinced that we can do nothing until we've seen the mole and the badger. and heard their latest news, and held conference, and taken their advice in this difficult matter. Yes, of course, said the Mole and the Badger, and said Toad, what's become of them, dear fellows? I had forgotten all about them. Well, may you ask, said the Rat reproachfully, while you were riding about the country in expensive motor cars and galloping proudly on blood horses and breakfasting on the fat of the land. Those two poor devoted animals have been campaigning out in the open, in every sort of weather, living every rough day and lying very hard at night, and watching over your house, and patrolling your boundaries, and keeping a constant eye on the stoats, and the weasels, scheming and planning and contriving how to get your property back to you. You don't deserve to have such true and loyal friends. Oh, Toad, you don't really. Someday, when it's too late, you'll be sorry you didn't value them more while you had them. I'm an ungrateful beast, I know, sobbed Toad, shedding bitter tears. But let me go out and fight them out into the cold, dark night and share their hardships and try to prove by it. Oh, hold on a bit, Shirley. I've heard the chink of dishes on a tray. Supper's here at last. Hooray! Come on, Ratty. Well, the Rat remembered the poor Toad had been in prison fare for considerable time, and the large allowances had therefore to be made. He followed him to the table accordingly, and hospitably encouraged him in his gallant efforts to make up for past privations. Not looking it up. They had just finished their meal and resumed their armchairs when they came to a heavy knock at the door. Toad was nervous, but Rat, nodding mysteriously at him, went straight up to the door and opened it, and in walked Mr. Badger. Oh, he had all the appearance of one who for some nights had been kept away from home with all its little comforts and conveniences. His shoes are covered with mud, and he was looking very rough and tousled. I say tousled. And then he had never been a very smart man, the Badger, at best of times. Now he came solemnly up to Toad, shook him by the paw, he doesn't have a paw, he's a toad, and said, "Welcome home, Toad. Alas, what am I saying? Home indeed. This is a poor homecoming. Unhappy Toad." When he turned his back upon him, he sat down at the table, drew up his chair, and helped himself to a large slice of cold pie. Toad is quite alarmed at the very serious and portentous style of greeting, but Rat whispered to him, "Never mind, don't take any notice, and don't say anything to him just yet. He's always rather low and despondent when he's wanting his victuals. And in a half hour's time, he'll be quite a different animal." So they waited in silence. Presently there came another and lighter knock. The Rat, with a nod to Toad, went to the door and ushered in Mole, very shabby and unwashed, with bits of hay and straw sticking in his fur. "Oh, hooray! Here's old Toad," cried the Mole, his face beaming. "Fancy having you back again." Yeah. And began to dance around him. Dance around him? He literally danced around him. "We never dreamt you could turn up so soon. Why, you must have managed to escape, you clever, ingenious, intelligent Toad." The Rat, alarmed, pulled him by his elbow, but it was too late. Toad was puffing and swelling already. "Clever? Oh, no," he said. "I'm not really clever. According to my friends, I've only broken out of the strongest prison in England. That's all. Captured a railway train, and escaped on it. That's all. And disguised myself and gone about the country, humbugging everybody. Oh, that's all. Oh, no. Oh, I'm a stupid ass, I am. And I'll tell you one or two more of my adventures, Mole, and you shall judge for yourself." Well, said the Mole, moving forward toward the supper table. "Supposing you talk while you eat, not a bite since breakfast. Oh my. Then he sat down and helped himself liberally into the cold beef and pickles. Toad straddled on the hearth rug, thrust his paw, he doesn't have paws, into his trouser pocket and pulled out a handful of silver. "Look at that," he cried, displaying it. "Nah, it's not so bad, is it? For a few minutes' work. And how do you think I done it, Mole? Horse stealing. That's how I done it." "Yeah, go on, Toad," said the Mole, immensely interested. "Now, Toad, do be quiet," said the Rat. "And don't you egg on Mole when you know what he is. But please tell us as soon as possible what the position is and what's best to be done now that Toad is back at last." "The position's about as bad as it can be," replied the Mole grumpily. And as for what's to be done, why, blessed if I know. The Badger and I have been around the place by night and day, always the same thing. Sentries posted everywhere, guns poked out at us, stones thrown at us, always an animal on the lookout. And when they see us, oh my, how they laugh, and that's what annoys me the most. Well, it's a very difficult position, said the rat, reflecting deeply, but I think I see now in the depths of my mind what Toad really ought to do. And I will tell you, he ought to, the longest M-dash I've ever seen. No, he oughtn't, shouted the mole with his mouth full. Nothing of the sort. You don't understand. What he ought to do is he ought to, another big long M-dash. Well, I shan't do it anyway, cried the Toad, getting excited. I'm not going to be ordered about by you fellows. It's my house we're talking about. And I know exactly what to do. And I tell you, I'm going to, another big long M-dash, by this time, they were all three talking at once, and at the top of their voices, and the noise was simply deafening, when a thin, dry voice made itself heard, saying, be quiet all at once, all you. And instantly, everyone was silent. It was Badger, who was, having finished his pie, had turned round in his chair and was looking at him severely. Oh, when he saw that he had secured their attention and that they were evidently waiting for him to address them, he turned back to the table again and reached out for the cheese. And so great was the respect and command by the solid qualities of the admirable animal, another word was uttered until he had quite finished his repast and brushed the crumbs from his knees. The Toad fidgeted a good deal, but the rat held him firmly down. When the Badger had quite done, he got up from his seat and stood before the fireplace, reflecting deeply. At last he spoke. Toad, he said severely, you bad, troublesome little animal. Aren't you, he's not little, he's like 5 feet tall. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? And what do you think your father, my old friend, would have said if he had been here tonight and had known of all your goings-on? Toad, who was by the sofa this time with his legs up, rolled over on his face, shaken by sobs of contrition. There, went on Badger more kindly. Never mind, stop crying. We're going to let bygones be bygones and to try to turn over a new leaf. But what the mole says is quite true. The stoats are on guard at every point. They make the best sentinels in the world, really. And it's quite useless to think of attacking the place. They're too strong for us. Then it's over, said the Toad, crying into the sofa cushions. And I shall go and enlist for a soldier. No, because there's a warrant out for you. And never see any dear Toad Hall, or see my dear Toad Hall anymore. Come, cheer up, Toady, said the Badger. There are more ways to get back into a place and take it by storm. I haven't said my last word yet, and now I'm going to tell you a great secret. Well, Toad sat up slowly and dried his eyes. Secrets had an immense attraction for him because he could never keep one, and he enjoyed a sort of unhallowed thrill he experienced when he went and told another animal, and after having faithfully promised not to do so. There is an underground passage, said the Badger impressively, that leads from River Bank, quite near here, right up into the middle of Toad Hall. Oh, nonsense, Badger, said the Toad, rather airily. You've been listening to some of the yarns they spin in the public houses? Not about here. I know every inch of Toad Hall, inside and out. Nothing of the sort, I do assure you. My young friend, said the Badger with a great severity, your father, who is a worthy animal, is a lot worthier than some others I know. It was a particular friend of mine, and he told me a great deal that he wouldn't have dreamt telling you. He discovered the passage. He didn't make it, of course. That was done hundreds of years before he ever came to live there. And he repaired it and cleaned it out because he thought it might come useful someday in case some trouble or danger. He showed it to me. Don't let my son know about it, he said. He's a good boy, but very light and volatile in character and simply cannot hold his tongue. If he ever had a real fix, it could be use to him. You may tell him about the secret passage, but not before. The other animals looked hard at Toad to see how he would take it. Toad Was inclined to be sulky at first, but he brightened up immediately, like a good fellow he was. Well, he said, perhaps I'm a bit of a talker. A popular fellow that I am. My friends get around me. We chaff, we sparkle, and we tell witty stories, and somehow my tongue gets wagging. And I have the gift of conversation, but I've been told I ought to have a salon, whatever that may be. Never mind, go on, Badger. How is this passage of yours going to help us? Oh, I've found out a thing or two lately, continued the Badger. I got Otter to disguise himself as a sweep and call the back door with the brushes over his shoulder, asking for a job. There's going to be a big banquet tomorrow night. It's somebody's birthday, the Chief Weasels, I believe, and all the weasels will be gathered together in the dining hall, eating and drinking and laughing and carrying on, suspecting nothing. No guns. No swords, no sticks, no arms of any sort, but sentinels will be posted as usual. Oh, exactly, said the Badger, that's my point. The weasels will trust entirely to their excellent sentinels, and that is where the passage comes in. That very useful tunnel leads right up under the butler's pantry, next to the dining hall. Aha! That squeaky board in the butler's pantry, said Toad. Now I understand it. Yeah, we shall creep out quietly into the butler's pantry, cried Mole. With pistols and swords and sticks, shouted the Rat. And rush in upon them, said the Badger. And whack 'em and whack 'em and whack 'em, cried the Toad in ecstasy, running round and round the room and jumping over chairs. I would hate to have this person as a friend in my house. Very well then, said the Badger, resuming his usual dry manner. Our plan is settled, and there's nothing more for you to argue and squabble about, so it's getting very late. All of you go off to bed at once, and we will make all the necessary arrangements in the course of the morning tomorrow. Oh my God, there's still 6 more pages to this. We get it. Just end the chapter. We get it. This is hell on earth. I'm trapped down here with gnats, and I have to keep reading. Toad, of course, went off to bed dutifully with the rest. Great. He knew better than to refuse, though he was feeling much too excited to sleep, but he had bad writing, a long day with many events crowded into it. The sheets and blankets were very friendly and comforting things. After plain straw and not too much of it spread on the floor of a draughty cell, and his head had not been many seconds on his pillow before he was snoring happily. Naturally, he dreamt a good deal about roads that ran away from him just when he wanted them, and canals that chased him, and burp caught him, and a barge that was sailed to the banqueting hall with this week's washing, just as he was giving a dinner party. But he was alone in the secret passage, rushing onward. But it twisted and turned and round and shook itself and sat up on the end. And yet somehow at last he found himself back in Toad Hall, safe and triumphant. There's probably police waiting for you. You just escaped prison. They know where you live. With all his friends gathered about around him and earnestly assuring him that he really was a clever toad. He slept till a late hour the next morning, and by the time he got down, he found that the other animals had finished their breakfast some time before. Mole had slipped off somewhere by himself without telling anyone where he's going, and Badger sat in the armchair, reading the paper, and not concerning himself with the slightest about what's going to happen the very evening. And the Rat, on the other hand, was running around the room busily, his arms full of weapons of every kind, distributing them in 4 little heaps on the floor, and saying excitedly under his breath as he ran, here's a sword for Rat, here's a sword for Mole, here's a sword for Toad, here's a sword for Badger, here's a pistol for Rat, here's a pistol for Mole, here's a pistol for Toad, and here's a pistol for Badger, and so on, in a regular, rhythmical way, while the 4 little heaps gradually grew and grew. And that's all. Yeah, very well. Rat, said the Badger, presently, looking at the busy little animal over the edge of his newspaper. I'm not blaming you, but let's just let us once get past the stoats with these detestable guns of theirs, and I assure you we shan't need any more swords or pistols. We 4, with our sticks, once we're inside the dining hall, why, we shall clear the floor of a lot of them in about 5 minutes, and I've done the whole thing myself. Only I didn't want to deprive you fellows of the fun. Well, it's as well to be on the safe side, said Rat reflectively, polishing the pistol barrel on his sleeve and looking at it. The Toad, having finished his breakfast, picked up a stout stick and swung it vigorously, belaboring imaginary animals. Then I'll learn him to steal my house, he cried. I'll learn him. Don't say learn 'em, Toad, said the Rat, greatly shocked. It's not good English. Had isn't good English either. What are you always nagging at Toad for? Inquired the Badger, rather peevishly. What? What's the matter with the English? It's the same that I use myself. Oh, here we go. And it's good enough for me. It ought to be good enough for you. I'm very sorry, said Rat humbly. Only I think it ought to be teach 'em, not learn 'em. Well, but we don't want to teach 'em, replied the Badger. We want to learn them. And learn 'em, and learn 'em. And what's more, we're going to do it, too. Oh, very well, have it your own way, said the Rat, and he was gathering together, getting all muddled, and presently he retired to a corner where he could be heard muttering, learn 'em, teach 'em, learn 'em, till the Badger told him rather sharply to leave off. Presently, the Mole came tumbling into the room, evidently, very pleased with himself. Well, I've been having such fun, he began at once. I've been getting a rise out of the stoats. I hope you've been very careful, Mole, said the Rat anxiously. I should hope so, too, said the Mole confidently. I've got the idea that when I went into the kitchen to see Toad's breakfast being kept hot for him, I found that the old washerwoman dress that he came home in yesterday, hanging on a towel horse before the fire. So I put it on, and the bonnet as well, and the shawl, and I went to Toad Hall, and as bold as you please. The sentries were on the lookout, of course, with their guns and their, who comes here? And all the rest of their nonsense. Good morning, gentlemen, I said, as I very respectfully. Want any washing done today? It looked at me very proud and stiff and haughty and said, go away, washerwoman. We don't want any washing on duty. Or any other time, says I, ho, ho, ho. Wasn't I funny, Toad? Poor, frivolous animal, said Toad very loftily. The fact is, he felt exceedingly jealous of Mole for what he had just done. It was exactly what he would have liked to have done himself, if only he had first thought of it, and he hadn't gone and overslept himself. Some of the stoats turned quite pink, continued the Mole, and the sergeant in charge, he said to me, very short, he said, run away, my good woman, run away. Don't keep my men idling and talking on their posts. Run away, says I. It won't be me that'll be running away in a very short time from now. Oh, moly, how could you, said the Rat, dismayed. And the Badger laid down his paper. Well, I could see them picking up their ears and looking at each other, went on the Mole. And the sergeant said, never mind her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Oh, don't I? Said I. Well, let me tell you this. My daughter, she washes for Mr. Badger, and that'll show you whether I know that I'm talking about. And you'll pretty soon know, too. 100 bloodthirsty badgers, armed with rifles, are going to attack Toad Hall this very night by way of paddock. 6 boatloads of rats with pistols and cutlasses will come up the river and effect a landing in the garden, while a picked body of toads, known as the diehards, or the death or glory toads, will storm the orchard and carry everything before them, yelling for vengeance. And they won't be much left to wash by the time they're done with you, unless you clear out while you have the chance. Then I ran away, and when I was out of sight, I hid. Presently, I came creeping back along the ditch and took a peep at them through the hedge. Oh, they were all nervous and flustered as could be, running all ways at once and falling all over each other, and every one giving orders to everybody else and not listening. And Sergeant kept sending off parties of stoats to distant parts of the grounds, and then sending other fellows to fetch them back again. I heard them saying to each other, oh, that's just like the weasels. They'll stop comfortably in the banqueting hall and have feastings and toasts and songs and all sorts of fun, while we just stay on guard in the cold and the dark, and in the end, be cut to pieces by bloodthirsty badgers. Oh, you silly ass, Mole, cried Toad. You've been and spoilt everything. Mole, said Badger in his dry, quiet way, I perceive you have more sense in your little finger than some other animals have in the whole of their fat bodies, and you've managed excellently, and I begin to have great hopes for you, good Mole, clever Mole. Toad was simply wild with jealousy, more especially that he couldn't make out for the life of him what Mole had done and was so particularly clever. But fortunately for him, he could show temper or expose himself to the Badger's sarcasm, and the bell rang for luncheon. It was a simple but sustaining meal. Bacon and broad beans, God, this chapter goes on forever, and macaroni pudding. And when they had quite done, the Badger settled himself to an armchair and said, we got our work cut out for us tonight, and it will probably be pretty late before we're quite through with it. So I'm just going to take 40 winks while I can. And he drew a handkerchief over his face and was soon snoring. The anxious and laborious rat at once resumed his preparations and started running between his four little heaps, muttering, he's a belt for rat, he's a belt for mole, he's a belt for toad, he's a belt for badger, and so on, with every fresh accoutrement he produced, to which there seemed really no end. So the mole drew his arm through Toad's and led him out into the open air, and shoved him into a wicker chair, and made him tell all his adventures from beginning to end, which Toad was only too willing to do. The mole was a good listener, and Toad, with no one to check his statements or to criticize an unfriendly spirit, rather to let himself go. Indeed, much of what he related belonged more properly to the category of what might have happened had I only thought of it in the time instead of 10 minutes afterwards. Those are always the best and raciest adventures, and why would they not be truly ours, as much as somewhat inadequate things that really come off? My God, thank God that chapter's done. I'm angry because I got another real long chapter to read before I can finish this turd fest. Why don't you get in the closet? I got that closet over there. That's where I go tell you about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House. And I'm gonna fight off some gnats. So once you get in the closet, and I'm gonna get in there with my guitar in a minute. Here I am. I beat you. I was waiting in the closet with my guitar the whole time to tell you about The Slow Cook Book by the author calls themselves DK, the letters D and the letter K. You want to hear about a book written by a person that just uses initials for their name? Sure. Slow cooking is the ultimate answer to low-cost, time-saving, nourishing family meals with over 200 easy recipes for a host of nutritious one-pot meals, including soups, curries, chilies, casseroles, risottos, tagines, pot roasts, stews, and even desserts. The Slow Cook Book offers a variety of delicious recipes. Simply add your ingredients to the pot. Let the slow cooker work its magic throughout the day and enjoy a delicious home-cooked meal. Just, quote, set it and forget it, unquote. That's kind of fun. Never thought about that. Set it and forget it. I got to remember that one. Step-by-step instructions guide you through different types of slow cooking and essential techniques so that you can achieve the best results. Showcasing two methods of slow cooking for each recipe using electric crock pot, and the other using a combination of traditional pots and pans. What? Stovetop and oven. What? You can't just let that go all day. The Slow Cook Book offers meal options for whatever method suits you best. So raid the store cupboard, plunder the fridge and freezer, and serve up healthy meals throughout the week in no time with this essential cookbook. That's the Slow Cookbook by DK. The category is Cooking Methods. It's in hardcover, oh thank God, for $24.99. You can get it from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Bookshop.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's, Target, and you know they made it when they're finally available in Walmart. Well, that turned out to be a turd. Why don't we get out of the closet and go back to the library and finish the last goddamn chapter of this book. All right, fine, we're back. The last incredibly long chapter of this book. This is the longest episode on Earth, and I hate every damn minute of it. Chapter 12, The Return of Ulysses. Oh, God, that's so pretentious. When it began to grow dark, the rat, with an air of excitement and mystery, summoned them back into his parlour, stood each of them up alongside his little heap, and proceeded to dress them up for the coming expedition. Oh, he was very earnest and thoroughgoing about it. Thoroughgoing? Is that really a word? It's all one word. There's no space. Thoroughgoing. I'm not looking it up, and the affair took quite a long time. First, there was a belt to go around each animal, then a sword to be stuck into each belt, then a cutlass, and the other side to balance it, then a pair of pistols and a policeman's truncheon. several sets of handcuffs, and some bandages, and sticking plaster, and a flask, and a sandwich case. Weird. The badger laughed good-humoredly and said, "All right, Ratty, it amuses you and it doesn't hurt me, and I'm going to do it all. I've got to do here just with this stick." But the rat only said, "Please, Badger, you know I shouldn't like to have you blame me afterwards to say that I've forgotten anything." When all was quite ready, the badger took a dark lantern in one paw. See, now, a badger has a paw. Grasped his great stick with the other, and said, "Now follow me. Mole first, 'cause I'm very pleased with him. Rat next, Toad last. And look here, Toady, don't you chatter so much as usual, or you'll be sent back, as sure as fate." The toad was so anxious not to be left out that he took up the inferior position assigned him without a murmur, and the animals set off. Burp, the badger, burp, led them along by the river for a little way, and then suddenly swung himself over the edge of the hole to the riverbank. A little above the water, the mole and the rat followed silently, swinging themselves successfully into the hole, as they had seen the badger do. But when it came to Toad's turn, of course, he managed to slip and fall into the water with a loud splash and a squeal of alarm, and he was hauled out by his friends and rubbed down, and wrung out hastily, comforted, set on his legs. Oh, but the badger was seriously angry, and told him that the very next time he made a fool of himself, he would most certainly be left behind. So at last they were in the secret passage, and cutting out the expedition had already begun. It was cold and dark and damp and low and narrow, and poor Toad began to shiver, partly from dread about what might be before him, and partly because he was wet through. Well, he's a toad. He's supposed to be used to... There's no rules in this book. Everyone's changing sizes, and toads don't like water. The lantern was far ahead, and he could not help lagging behind a little in the darkness. Then he heard the rat call out, warning, "Come on, Toad," and a terror seized him of being left behind. Alone in the darkness, and he came on without such a rush that he upset the rat into mole and the mole into badger, and for a moment all was confusion. Oh, but the badger thought they were being attacked from behind. And as there was no room to use a stick or a cutlass, he drew a pistol. It was on one point of putting a bullet in a toad. But then he found out what really happened. Oh, and he was very angry indeed. And he said, "Now this time that tiresome toad shall be left behind." Oh, but Toad whimpered, and the other two promised that they would be answerable for his good conduct, and at last the badger was pacified. And the procession moved on. Only this time the rat brought up the rear with a firm grip on the shoulder of Toad. So they groped and shuffled along with their ears pricked up and their paws on their pistols, till at last the badger said, by now it'd be pretty nearly under the hall. And suddenly they heard, far away as it might be, and yet apparently nearly over their heads, a confused murmur of sound as if people were shouting and cheering and stamping on the floor and hammering on the tables. And the toad, nervous terrors, all returned. But the badger only remarked placidly, "They are going it, the weasels." The passage now began to slope upward, and they groped onward a little further, and then the noise broke out again, quite distinct this time, and very close above them. "Ooh-ray, ooh-ray, ooh-ooh, dash-ray, dash-ooh-ray." They heard, and the stamping of little feet on the floor. Really, is it little, or are they 5 feet tall? And the clinking of glasses as their little fists, or normal-sized fists, pounded on that table. "What a time they're having," said the badger. "Come on." And they hurried along the passage till it came to a full stop, and they found themselves standing under the trapdoor that led up to the butler's pantry. Such a tremendous noise was going on in the banqueting hall that there was a little danger of their being overheard. Oh, the badger said, "Now, boys, all together," and the four of them put their shoulders to the trapdoor and heaved it back. Hoisting each other up, they found themselves standing in the pantry with only a door between them and the banqueting hall, where their unconscious enemies were carousing. The noise, as they emerged from the passage, was simply deafening. At last, as the cheering and hammering slowly subsided, a voice could be made out saying, "Well, I did not propose to detain you much longer." Great applause. "But before I resume my seat," renewed cheering, "I would like to say one word to our kind host, Mr. Toad. We all know Toad," great laughter, "good Toad, modest Toad, honest Toad," shrieks of merriment. Only just, let me get at him, muttered the toad, grinding his teeth. Well, hold on a minute, said the badger, restraining him with the difficulty. Get ready, all of you. Let me sing you a little song when I'm... Oh, God damn it, said the voice, which I have composed on the subject of Toad. Prolonged applause. And then the chief weasel, for it was he, began in a high squeaky voice. Oh, God damn it, I'm not doing a high squeaky voice. Toad, he went a-pleasuring gaily down the street. The badger drew himself up, took a firm grip of his stick with both paws, and glanced around at his comrades and cried, the hour has come, follow me, and flung the door open wide. My! Exclamation point. New line. What a squealing and squeaking and screeching filled the air! Exclamation point. Well, it might have terrified the weasels dive under the tables and spring madly up the windows. Well, might the ferrets rush wildly for the fireplace and get hopelessly jammed up the chimney. Well, might the tables and the chairs be upset and glass and china be sent crashing on the floor in the panic of that terrible moment when the four heroes strode wrathfully into the room. Oh, the mighty badger, his whiskers bristling, his great cudgel whistling through the air. Mole, black and grim, brandishing his stick and shouting his awful war cry. What the hell does his awful war cry sound like? A mole, rat, desperate and determined, his belt bulging with weapons of every age and every variety. Toad, frenzied with excitement and injured pride, swollen to twice his ordinary size, leaping into the air and emitting toad whoops that chilled them to the marrow. Does a toad whoop really cheer to the marrow? Toad, he went a-pleasuring, he yelled, I'll pleasure him. And he went straight for the chief weasel. They were all but four, and to the panic-stricken weasels, the hall seemed full of monstrous animals, gray, black, brown, yellow, whooping and flourishing, enormous cudgels, and they broke and fled with squeals of terror and dismay, this way and that, through the windows and up the chimney, we already established that, anywhere to get out of reach of those terrible sticks. The affair was soon over. Up and down the whole length of the hall strode the four friends, whacking with their sticks at every head that shoved itself. And in 5 minutes, the room was cleared. Through the broken windows and shrieks of terrified weasels escaping across the lawn were borne faintly to their ears. On the floor lay prostrate some dozen or so of the enemy, of whom the mole was busily engaged in fitting handcuffs. And the badger, resting from his labors, leant on his stick and wiped his honest brow. Mole, he said, you are the best of fellows. Just cut along outside and look after those stoat sentries of yours and see what they're doing. I have an idea that thanks to you, we shan't have much trouble from them tonight. And Mole vanished promptly through the window, and the badger bade the other two set the table with his legs again, and pick up knives and forks and plates and glasses from the debris of the floor, and see if they could find materials for supper. I want some grub, I do, he said, in that rather common way he had of speaking. Sit your stumps, Toad, and look lively. We've got your house back for you, and you don't offer us so much as a sandwich. Yeah. Toad felt rather hurt that the badger didn't say pleasant things to him, and as he had to the mole, and tell him what a fine fellow he was and how splendidly he had fought. For he was rather particularly pleased with himself. Yeah, because they're just bullying him. They've been bullying him forever. I mean, yes, he's an idiot, but at the same time, they're constantly abusing the toad and using him in his home. This is the second time. Anyways, I'm moving on. Chief Weasel sent him flying across the table with one blow of his stick, but he bustled about, and so did the rat, and soon they found some guava jelly in a glass dish, and a cold chicken, and a tongue that had hardly been touched, some trifle, and quite a lot of lobster salad. All right. And in the pantry, they came upon a basket full of French rolls and a quantity of cheese and butter and celery. They were just about to sit down when the mole clambered in through the window, chuckling with an armful of rifles. It's all over, he reported. From what I can make out, as soon as the stoats, who were very nervous and jumpy already, heard the shrieks and the yells and the uproar inside the hall. Some of them threw down their rifles and fled, and the others stood fast for a bit. And when the weasels came rushing out upon them, they thought they were betrayed. And the stoats grappled with the weasels, and the weasels fought to get away. And they wrestled and wriggled and punched each other and rolled over and over until most of them rolled onto the river. Yeah, and they all disappeared by now, one way or another. And I got their rifles, so that's all right. Excellent and deserving animals, said the badger. his mouth full of chicken and trifle. Now there's just one more thing I want you to do. Mole, before you sit down with your supper, along of us, and I wouldn't trouble you only if I knew that I could trust you to see a thing done, and I wish I could say the same for everyone I know. I'd send Rat if he wasn't a poet. I want you to take those fellows on the floor. They're upstairs with you and have some bedrooms cleaned out and tidied up and made comfortable. So, see that they sweep under, in all caps, the beds and put their clean sheets and pillowcases on and turn down one corner of the bedclothes, just as you know it ought to be done, and have a can of hot water and a clean towels. Jesus Christ, this guy. And fresh cakes of soap put in each room, and then you can give them a licking apiece, if it's a satisfaction to you, and put them out by the back door, and we shan't see any of them, in all caps, I fancy, and then come along and have some of this cold tongue. Gross. It's first rate, and I'm very pleased with you, Mole. I love he's basically saying, take these people as hostages, make them do a ton of work so that you can stay comfortably in the house, and then just beat the shit out of them. So weird. The good-natured Mole picked up a stick, formed his prisoners in a line on the floor, gave them the order of quick march, and led his squad off to the upper floor. After a time, he appeared again, smiling, and said that every room was ready and as clean as a new pin, and he didn't have to lick them either yet. I thought on the whole that he had to lick it enough for one night, and the weasels, when I pointed out to them, quite agreed with me, and they wouldn't think of troubling me. Oh, they were very penitent, and they said they were extremely sorry for what they'd done, but it was all the fault of the chief weasel and the stoats. And if ever they could do anything for us, any time to make up, all they gotta do is mention it. So I have to give them a roll apiece and let them out the back, and off they ran as hard as they could. Then the mole pulled his chair up to the table and pitched into his cold tongue. The toad, like the gentleman he was, put all his jealousy from him and said heartily, "Thank you kindly, dear Mole, for all your pains and trouble tonight, and especially for your cleverness this morning." The badger was pleased at that and said, there spoke up a brave toad. So they finished their supper in great joy and contentment, and presently retired to the rest of the clean sheets, safe in Toad's ancestral home, won back by matchless valor, consummate strategy, and proper handling of sticks. And here you'd think the story's done, but no, it keeps going. The following morning, Toad, who had overslept himself as usual, came down to breakfast disgracefully late and found on the table a certain quantity of eggshells and some fragments of cold and leathery toast, a coffee pot, 3/4 empty, and really very little else. He did not tend to improve his temper, considering that, after all, it was his own house. And through the French windows of the breakfast room, he could see the mole and the water rat resting in the wicker chairs out in the lawn, evidently telling each of the other stories. Roaring with laughter, kicking up their short legs in the air, and the badger, who was in an armchair deep in the morning paper, merely looked up and nodded when Toad entered the room. But Toad, who knew his man, so he sat down and made the breakfast best he could, merely observing to himself that he would get square with the others sooner or later. And when he had nearly finished, Badger looked up and remarked rather shortly, sorry, Toad, but I'm afraid there's a heavy morning's work in front of you. You see, we really ought to have a banquet at once to celebrate this affair. It's expected of you. In fact, it's the rule. All right, said the Toad readily. Anything to oblige. Though why on earth would you want me to have a banquet in the morning? I cannot understand. But you know, I do not want to live to please myself, but merely to find what my friends want, and then try to arrange it for them. You dear old badger. Well, don't pretend to be stupider than you really are, replied the badger crossly. Don't chucker and splutter in your coffee while you're talking. It's not manners. What I mean is, the banquet will be at night, of course, but the invitations will have to be written and got off at once. You gotta write them, and I'll sit down at the table. There's stacks of paper on it, with Toad's Hall at the top in blue and gold. Write invitations to your friends, and if you stick to it, we shall get them out before luncheon. And I'll bear a hand, too, and take my share of the burden. I'll order the banquet. What? Cried the Toad, dismayed. Me stop indoors and write a lot of rotten letters on a jolly morning like this when I want to go around my property and set everything and everyone to right, and I'll swagger about and enjoy myself. Certainly not. I'll see you. Stop it a minute, though. Why, of course, Dear Badger, what is my pleasure or convenience compared to that of others? You wish it done, then it shall be done. Go, Badger. Order the banquet. Order what you like. And then join our young friends outside their innocent mirth, oblivious to me and my cares and toils. I sacrifice this fair morning on the altar of duty and friendship. Well, the Badger looked at him suspiciously, but Toad's frank, open countenance made it difficult to suggest any unworthy motive in his change of attitude. He quitted the room, accordingly, in the direction of the kitchen, and as soon as the door had closed behind him, Toad hurried to the writing table. A fine idea had occurred to him while he was talking. He would write the invitations, and he would take care to mention the leading part that he had taken in a fight, and how he had laid the chief weasel flat, and how he would hint at his adventures, and what a career of triumph he had to tell about it. And on the flyleaf, he would set out a sort of program of entertainment for the evening, something like this. He sketched out in his head. Speech, 3 dots, space, 1 dot, by Toad. There would be another speeches by Toad during the evening. Address, 3 dots, space, by Toad. Synopsis, our prison system, the waterways of old England, horse stealing, and how to deal properly, its rights and duties. Back to the land, a typical English squire. Song, 3 dots, space, 1 dot, space, by Toad, composed by himself. Other compositions by Toad. Will be sung in the course of the evening by the 3 dots composer. The idea pleased him mightily, and he worked very hard and got all the letters finished by noon, at which hour it was reported to him that there was a small and rather bedraggled weasel at the door, inquiring timidly whether he could be of any service to the gentleman. Toad swaggered out and found it was one of the prisoners of the previous evening, very respectful and anxious to please, and he patted him on the head and shoved the bundle of invitations in his paw. He does actually have a paw. Weasels have paws. And told him to cut along quick and deliver them as fast as he could. And if he'd like to come back again in the evening, perhaps there might be a shilling for him. Or, again, perhaps there mightn't. And the poor weasel seemed really quite grateful and hurried off eagerly to do his mission. God, I've still got 6 pages left. This thing goes on forever. When the other animals came back to luncheon, very boisterous and breezy after a morning on the river, the mole, whose conscience had been pricking him, looked doubtfully at Toad, expecting to find him sulky and depressed. Instead, another gnat. Get out of here. Instead, he was so uppish and inflated that the mole began to suspect something. While the rat and the badger exchanged significant glances, as soon as the meal was over, Toad thrust his paws, he doesn't have paws, deep into his trouser pockets, remarked casually, "Well, look after yourselves, you fellows. Ask for anything you want," and was swaggering off in the direction of the garden, where he wanted to think out an idea or two for his coming speeches, when Rat caught him by the arm. Toad rather suspected what he was after and did his best to get away, but when Badger took him firmly by the other arm, he began to see that the game was up. The 2 animals conducted him between them into a small smoking room. I've got one of those at the end of the show, that opened up into the entrance hall, shut the door, and put him into a chair. When they both stood in front of him, while Toad sat silent and regarded them with much suspicion and ill humor. Now look here, Toad, said the rat. It's about this banquet, and I'm very sorry I have to speak to you like this, but we want you to understand clearly once and for all that there are going to be no speeches and no songs. Try to grasp the fact that on this occasion we're not arguing with you, we're just telling you. This is just bullying. Toad saw that he was trapped. They understood him, they saw through him, and they got ahead of him. His pleasant dream was shattered. "Mayn't I sing them just one little song?" he pleaded piteously. "No, not one little song," replied the rat firmly, though his heart bled as he noticed the trembling lip of the poor disappointed Toad. "It's no good, Toady. You know well that your songs are all conceit, and boasting, and vanity, and your speeches are all self-praise, and gross exaggeration, and gas," said the badger in his common way. "It's for your own good, Toady," went on the rat. "You know you must turn over a new leaf sooner or later, and now seems a splendid time to begin, a sort of turning point in your career. Please don't think that saying all this doesn't hurt me more than it hurts you." Toad remained a long while plunged in thought, and at last he raised his head, and traces of strong emotion were visible on his features. "You have conquered, my friends," he said in broken accents. "It was, to be sure, but a small thing that I asked, merely to leave a blossom, and to expand for yet one more evening, to let myself go and to hear the tumultuous applause that always seems to me, somehow, to bring out my best qualities. However, you're right. I know I'm wrong. Henceforth, I will be a very different Toad. My friends, you shall never have occasion to blush for me again, but oh dear, this is a hard world." And pressing his handkerchief to his face, he left the room with faltering footsteps. "Badger," said Rat, "I feel like a brute. I wonder what you feel like." "Oh, God, the gnats." "Oh, I know, said the Badger gloomily. "But the thing had to be done. This good fellow has, got to live here and hold his own and be respected. Would you have a common laughingstock mocked and jeered by stoats and weasels?" "Well, of course not," said the Rat. "And talking of weasels, it's lucky we came upon that little weasel just as we were setting out with Toad's invitations. I suspected something from what you told me, and I had a look at one or two, and they were simply disgraceful. I confiscated the whole lot, and the good mole is now sitting in the blue boudoir, filling up plain, simple invitation cards." At last, the hour for the banquet began to draw near, and Toad, who on leaving the others had retired to his bedroom, was still sitting there, melancholy and thoughtful, his brow resting on his paw. He doesn't have a paw, and he wondered long and deeply. Gradually his countenance cleared, and he began to smile long, slow smiles. What does that look like? Just one long, slow smile? No, he says long, slow smiles, like he's doing it over and over again, real slow. Then he took to a giggling in a shy, self-conscious manner. He got up, locked the door, drew the curtains across his windows, collected all the chairs in the room and arranged them in a semicircle, then took up his position in front of them, swelling visibly. Then he bowed, coughed twice, and letting himself go with uplifted voice, he sang to an enraptured audience that his imagination so clearly saw. Toad's last little song. Oh, God damn it. The Toad came home. There's panic in the parlors and howling in the halls. There was crying in the cowsheds and shrieking in the stalls. When Toad came home, then Toad came home. There was smashing in a window and a crashing of a door, and there was shivering of the weasels that fainted on the floor. When Toad came home, bang go the drums. The trumpeters are tooting, and the soldiers are saluting, and the cannon they are shooting, and the motor cars are hooting, and the hero comes. Shout, hooray, and let each one of the crowd try to shout it out very loud, in honor of an animal of whom you are justly proud, for it's Toad's great day. He sang very loud, with great injunction and expression, and when he had done, he sang it all over again, and then he heaved a deep sigh, a long, long, long sigh. Then he dipped his hairbrush in a water jug and parted his hair. He has hair? Oh my God, this Toad has hair? Yeah, parted his hair in the middle. Gross. What does it look like? I don't even want to know what it looks like. And plastered it down very straight and sleek on each side of his face. And, unlocking the door, went quietly down the stairs to greet his guests, who he knew must be assembling in the drawing room. All the animals cheered when he entered, and crowded around to congratulate him, and say nice things about his courage and his cleverness, and his fighting qualities. But Toad only smiled faintly and murmured, "No, not at all," or sometimes for a change, on the contrary." Otter, who was standing on the hearthrug, describing to an admiring circle of friends exactly how he would have managed things had he been there, came forward with a shout and threw his arm round Toad's neck and tried to take him round the room in triumphal progress, but Toad, in a mild way, was rather snubby to him, remarking gently as he disengaged himself, "Badger was the mastermind. The mole and the water rat bore the brunt of the fighting, and I merely served in the banks and did little or nothing." The animals were evidently puzzled and taken aback by this unexpected attitude of his, and Toad felt, as he moved from one guest to another, making his modest responses, that he was an object of absorbing interest to everyone. God, this chapter won't end. Oh, there we go. The Badger had ordered everything of the best, and the banquet was a great success. There was much talking and laughter and chaff among the animals. But through it all, Toad, who of course was in his chair, looked down his nose and murmured pleasant things to animals on either side of him. At intervals, he stole a glance at Badger and the rat, and always, when he looked, they were staring at each other with their mouths open, and this gave him the greatest satisfaction. Some of the younger and livelier animals, as the evening wore on, got whispering to each other that things were not so amusing as they used to be in the good old days, and there were some knockings on the table and cries of Toad, speech from Toad, song, Mr. Toad's song. But Toad only shook his head gently and raised one paw, he doesn't have a paw, in mild protest. And by pressing delicacies on his guests by topical small talk, and by earnest inquiries after members of their families had not yet old enough to appear at social functions, managed to convey to them that this dinner was being run on strictly conventional lines. He was indeed an altered Toad. After this climax, the four animals continued to lead their lives, so rudely broken in upon by civil war, in great joy and content. God, it's not ending. And undisturbed by further risings of invitation. Toad, after due consultation with his friends, selected a handsome gold chain and laquette set with pearls, which he dispatched to the Galier's daughter with a letter that even the Badger admitted to be modest, grateful, and appreciative. And the engine driver, in his turn, was properly thanked and compensated for all his pains and trouble under severe compulsion from the Badger, and even the barge woman was, with some trouble, sought out and the value of the horse discreetly made good to her. Though Toad kicked terribly at this, holding himself to be an instrument of fate, sent to punish fat woman with mottled arms who couldn't tell a real gentleman if they saw one. I hate this. The amount involved, it was true, was not very burdensome. The G-word, Roma's valuation being admitted by the local assessors to be approximately correct. Sometimes in the course of a long summer evenings, the friends would take a stroll together in the wildwood, and now successfully tamed so far as they were concerned, and it was pleasing to see how respectfully they were greeted by the inhabitants, and how the mother weasels would bring their young ones to the mouths of their holes and say, pointing, "Look, baby, there goes the great Mr. Toad, and the gallant water rat, a terrible fighter, walking along them. And yonder comes the famous Mr. Mole, of whom you so often have heard your father tell." You got the shit beat out of them by him. Their infants were factious and quite beyond control, and they would quiet them by telling them that they didn't hush and not fret them. The terrible great Badger would up and get them. This was a base libel on Badger, who, though he cared little about society, was rather fond of children. But it never failed to have its full effect. Oh, thank God it's done. Well, why don't we go downstairs and talk about what we read, and then you can go home. Well, there you are, here in my smoking room, where my wife has decided it's fun to keep birds here, and I'm sure the little birds in the cages in the smoking room all have lung cancer. What do we learn? In Chapter 11, Toad is still an idiot. He gets help from Rat and doesn't appreciate it, or even that Rat saved his life. He needs to be scolded about how he's an embarrassment to his friends and hated by the animals in the wildwood. They think he doesn't deserve his home and his influence when he acts like a moron, which is something which somebody would say to Elon Musk. Speaking of his home, Badger decides to live in Toad Hall and keep it clean and protected. And weirdly enough, Mole also decides to live there, which is kind of flies in the face of his friendship and living situation with Rat. They don't really talk about it much. It just kind of happens. And Rat doesn't seem to really mind very much, which is kind of weird because they're so dependent on each other for most of the story. With how they talk about it, it becomes clear that they're staying there because they just kind of like the lifestyle until they're kicked out. Mole and Badger are more alike than before. They both appreciate a well-planned heist. Both Toad and Rat have no idea what's really going on, but Mole and Badger bond over Mole's use of the art of disguise and persuasion to turn the stoats against the weasels. It looks like Mole isn't an innocent babe in the woods anymore, and needing to depend on Rat for his new independence in the wide world. So I guess the downside is that just Mole doesn't need Rat anymore. And luckily in this story, the rat doesn't care. Doesn't care who's in his home. Oh, you're not here anymore? Doesn't bother me. In chapter 12, they decide to use a secret tunnel to wage a surprise attack on Toad Hall. Each member brings a skill to this. Badger using his muscle and confidence. Toad with his dumb force and just general ignorance. And Mole with his gift for confusing people. And Rat with all his weapons. My God, he's got a lot of weapons. They scold Toad relentlessly for putting them in this position and leave him out of the planning, making it clear that he's too dumb and cowardly to really help, though he's probably just as useful, if not more useful, than any of the rest of them during their battle. But this chapter shows a kind of direct bullying seen previously when they locked him in his house, and I get the feeling that the Badger and the Mole feel a kind of entitlement to his home when he was gone, and their motivations aren't as much about friendship and some of the hard lessons that they want to teach him as it is painted in the story, unless the author actually feels that this is how people are supposed to act with each other. Again, Toad, being based off the author's own son, makes this more creepy. It's kind of like an indirect way of sending a message. The creatures of the wild wood were frightening and monstrous before and are shown to be like any other animal or people. I don't know how this book works anymore. It makes it clear that they're all human-sized and living among humans. Is this back to all the animals being tiny again? I don't know. The book ends in a weird way. Toad is for sure at least 5 feet tall from the previous chapters, so he's got a normal-sized house, which means the forest is full of gigantic ferrets and weasels. But anyways, the mystery of these animals is removed when they're scared off or forced into a kind of indentured servitude. Later, when they speak of Badger and the others, it's with reverence and fear. So what do we learn? That pretty much nothing matters. Everything's about vague entertainment. This book, not really written for children apparently, doesn't have to follow any logic or even basic world building. Animals change size all the time, I guess. Spooky animals were never spooky. You got a child getting lost in the book that doesn't lead to any narrative purpose, including meeting the wood god with no follow-up. A rat that starts out being an important character just turns out to be two-dimensional towards the end, and you don't really have a reason to believe that Mole is a growing character. But bloop, he just matures out of nowhere, and he's awesome now. A Toad who grows towards the end, but magically, all the police who have been chasing him for the last few chapters just don't care anymore. They lost interest. He even has a giant banquet so that everyone in the community knows he's back in his home. And the police are just like, we already chased him for a while. We're done. He handcuffs some kind of weasel. So what's he going to do with him? Take him to the police? So the book is written well. It's not a bad book. If I didn't know anything about the author, I'd be like, well, it was cute. It's kind of weird. It's kind of all over the place, but it was cute. And it's, written pretty well. I have no complaints about the writing style or anything like that. The prose is magnificent. But, damn it, I had to learn about the author again. Every time I learn about the author of any of these books I read, I hate the book in the end because I can't separate myself from the author and the art. Especially knowing that Toad is supposed to be his kid. Okay, I'm going to let it go. Well, with that, why don't you go back to your home and leave me the hell alone? And I am going to figure out why I can't get my washing machine to stop smelling like human feces. And the gnats. All the gnats. But with that, thanks for listening, and I will most likely see you next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, there's that. Are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people. Not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com, which just points you to my link tree. Everything's on the link tree. Just go to the link tree if you want to see where I am. And of course, Linktree has the dumbest URL in the world. LINK tr.ee/nuzzlehouse. It's the dumbest thing. If you go to nuzzlehouse.com, it's just going to reroute you over there after giving you some weird error about it not being secure. I hate it. I hate the internet. But if you go there, you get to hear some of the other stuff that I and my wife work on, like the Radio Mystery Theater show, where we try to recreate the same show that used to be on in the 70s, but they don't make any episodes anymore. So we make our own, and we just steal all their commercials. And also, just in the curious mind, we made a Christmas album. If you go to our link tree, you can see that we made a Christmas album. It's the first thing we did after getting married, which I think everyone should do when they get married, is start talking about the Christmas album they're going to make. And we're working on a new show where we give relationship advice by reading paranormal smut. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly, glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdling or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.